Good afternoon. Welcome, Richard Wilding. Great to have you with us this afternoon, Richard. Thank you for spending the time with me this afternoon. Maybe you could just introduce yourself very briefly so that we have some context as to who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Richard Wilding. I'm Professor of Supply Chain Strategy at Cranfield School of Management. So you're probably wondering, well, what on earth is supply chain strategy all about? Well, basically, I work with global organizations about really structuring things so that you and I can get the stuff we want on the table or wherever we want it. And it's really, if you like, talking about the coordination of all those elements to make that work. So it involves thinking about the processes we have, the networks, the infrastructure, the equipment we're using, the information systems, but also very importantly, the people as well within those networks. So that's a very quick overview. I fell accidentally into academia. It wasn't my life's dream, but I've been there for quite a few years now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rich. That's great. You've been around an awful lot in the press and the media over the last 12 to 18 months, talking to us about all sorts of things. But I guess the first question to ask you is, we've had a load of things happen to us over the last 12 to 18 months. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had another Suez crisis. Just tell us a bit about the impact that that's made on the supply chain and the challenges that business have faced because of that.
Okay, so if we're looking at supply chains, one of the key things that we need to recognise, most supply chains are pretty global at the moment. So if we're talking about, the movements of goods and people and the associated supply chains with those, these are very global. So if we're looking at, any product that you or I have, if I look around my office and I'm looking at, for example, my webcams, my screens, phones, keypads and everything, these actually, to get them to here, they plot a route around the world, and that'd be raw materials and everything else coming together. One of the big challenges that, of course, occurred with the pandemic was that these supply chains were disrupted. So when we're talking about the issue of supply chain risk, really, there are a number of key risks that we have, but we often talk about supply side risks and also demand side risks. So one of the challenges with the pandemic was initially it was a supply side risk. So we knew that various areas in China were going into lockdown. That rolled into Italy, of course, in the early days of the pandemic. And that actually meant that if you were sourcing from those particular locations, all of a sudden, very, very quickly, you were unable to, there were delays in your products actually arriving and so on and so forth. So we had that supply side. But then at the same time, we then started to have a demand side impact, because lockdowns actually meant that customers, you and I, actually wanted different things. So in a way, a perfect storm started to be created. And on top of that, if you like, the logistics flows were also being severely disrupted. So for example, if you think about the fact that because of lockdown, ports were being shut down or they were losing capacity, that meant that we were unable to ship particular things. And in a way, a bit like, I often say it's a bit of a shopping trolley analogy. If you think about, you want all the shopping trolleys near the entrance to the store, and you then need a system to bring them back to the door, from the extremities of the car park. If you do nothing about it, very quickly, customers get a bit upset because they can't get their shopping trolleys. The same thing happened with containers. So we ended up with all containers in the wrong place. Air freight, people forget that it's generally passengers upstairs, freight below stairs. So all of a sudden you ground a lot of the aviation. That once again has a big impact on the availability of air freight. And we're actually still seeing the repercussions of this today. And there are forecasts that we can be continually being disrupted for a while. We've already, as we're speaking today, there is also some lockdowns which have been announced in China, which are actually disrupting port movements in China again. So this is something which is sort of continuing as we're speaking.